Hey, we're going to keep going in the book of James. So if you'll head over to James chapter 1, we're going to be starting at verse 13. So I'll be getting my stuff loaded up while you're heading over. But James chapter 1, verse 13. And while we head over there, I want you to be thinking about, obviously, as you're going through trial should say, I'm being tempted by God, since God is not tempted by evil and he doesn't tempt anyone. So let's talk about what these words mean. By the way, you can see that right here that the words tempt and trial, you might have a different translation. It'll say that God doesn't, that no one undergoing a temptation should say, I'm being tempted by God. They're very similar. Those are the words that are there, right? That behind it, it could be trial, it could be temptation. It does appear that in this context, we're dealing with, in a trial, you will have temptations that will come at you, is what it seems to be. So notice what's happening in this context. As somebody's going through a trial, they're going to have a temptation that will then pull them and to draw them away towards sin. And you've got these people who are starting to say, well, you know, God is the one who is making me do this. He's saying no one should say, I'm being tempted by God. And so what they're doing is probably one of two things. In one regard, maybe people are saying, well, look, God is sovereign over all things. He is the one who has brought me into this trial already. It says that we should be focused on him through it. He's allowing this to happen. So therefore, since he has brought me to this place and he's allowed me to go through this trial, then he is the one who has brought me to this temptation. He is the one who's tempting me towards sin. And that's what somebody in the church is probably saying. And James is going to caution and say, hold on a second. And he's going to tell us how that is not how the case is, that God will bring us into trials, but he's not the one dangling the sin in front of us. The other part of this might actually be more, I think, hitting against the kind of the cultural view that we have today, which is, I was born this way, God made me this way, so therefore I'm inclined to do these things. I remember listening to bands that I loved listening to in high school, and looking back now, you know, I'm just horrified at the music that I used to listen to and the words that they would sing, and I remember listening to one of the interviews with one of the guys, and it just the mouth that he had, he said, well, you know, God made me to be funny, and I'm just being who he made me to be. And it was the worst kind of garbage that would just come out of his mouth. And he viewed himself as a Christian, too. But it was the kind of, and so for me, it'd be like, oh, in his albums, he thanks God. He must be up there. Like, no, he's not. But here's what he's doing. These are people saying either one of two things. God has brought me to this trial, therefore he's the one tempting me. Or they're saying, God has brought me and made these desires in me, and he's made me this way, so therefore he is the one who has brought me to this temptation as well. And notice what he says. No one should say that. Because he says God is not tempted by evil, meaning God has no inclination towards evil at all. He doesn't like evil. Evil has no place in his presence. He is not tempted by evil. There's nothing about him that he likes it or thinks, you know, this is good, and you know, maybe I like a little bit of this or a little bit of that. Like, you'll see that in the Greek pantheon of gods. They're tempted towards evil. The kind of things, when you get into the polytheism of the world, their gods are into all sorts of weird stuff. And you might find one loves evil and one doesn't like evil. But what we're seeing here is God has no inclination towards evil, is what he's saying. Now, interesting enough, they're looking and they're saying, God has made me do this. And there's some parallels, right, to what we would see, you know, in the garden story. Remember in Genesis chapter 3, after the sin has taken place, when God comes and he says in Genesis 3:11, he asked, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? And the man replied, the woman that you gave to be with me, she gave me some of the fruit from the tree, and I ate it. And the Lord asked the woman, what have you done? And the woman said, the serpent deceived me, and I ate it. And so what we see is this inclination in humans to say, it's not my fault. This is just in front of me. It's how I'm wired, all of that. And so they're saying God is not tempted by evil at all. We're going to try to pass the buck in whatever we can, whatever way. But God has no inclination towards evil. And then it says, he doesn't tempt anyone. Now, some of your translations might say, he doesn't test anyone. But the words, like I said, interchangeable, test and temptation, and they mean, it could be the same word, but they mean very different things. We do know that God tests people. You see that explicitly, Exodus 20:20. Moses responded to the people, don't be afraid, for God has come to test you so that you will fear him and will not sin. God will gladly put people in front of a test to show. We've even seen in the context here, right, that they're seeing he's testing your faith, right? That you're going to go through a trial to test your faith. He's going to see what you're made of. But he's not the one dangling the decision in front of towards sin. He's just allowing you to go through something to find out what you're really made of. And so this is what we see. God is not tempted by evil, but he will allow you to go through it. So we know that God is a good God, and we'll see more about that in a second. Notice what else it says about temptation. It says this, but each person is tempted when he's drawn away and enticed by his own evil desire. So actually these words, as you start to kind of look at this, you'll see drawn away. It's kind of like a fishing imagery. It's being yanked, pulled out, right? It really is. It's one of those things that you begin to see. It's the idea of the temptation is right in front of you, and then once it snags you, it gets you, you're gone, right? That's the implication of these verses here, is that sin, you have this temptation that comes, and it's right in front of you. You grab onto it, and once you get it, you're pulled away by your evil desire. And so that's what he's showing in here. And it's very similar, right? That it starts, right? It starts with your own evil desire. You begin to get enticed by that, and that's where things begin to snowball. It's very similar to Genesis chapter 3 as well. Remember the progression of what takes place. There's the fruit at the tree, and I think James is making some of these parallels here. Genesis chapter 3, the exchange between Eve and the serpent says, no, you will certainly not die. The serpent said to the woman, in fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good from evil. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food and delightful to look at. So it began to change towards, I know I'm not supposed to, but now all of a sudden I want that. It looks good to me. I'm thinking about it more. And then it says, and it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she took some of the fruit, ate it, and also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. We'll do that another time, but you understand Adam was just standing there the whole time. He wasn't off somewhere. He's just letting this all happen. That's why he's blamed, by the way, through it all. But here's something else to recognize, right? Each one is enticed by his own evil desire. And the big implication is that you and I have evil desires within us that will draw us away. Notice he doesn't talk about Satan being the one tempting people here, though he will deal with Satan later, and we do see Satan has tempted. But it seems to be that maybe the reason he doesn't talk about Satan here is that the majority of the time we get into trouble is because that you and I have some evil desires in our hearts that will lead us astray. Think about what Peter says. He says this in 1 Peter 2:11, dear friends, I urge you, as strangers and exiles, to abstain from the sinful desires. And what does he say? They wage war against the soul. You and I have a problem. And in all of us, we have sinful desires that were coming out against us to get us to slip up. And it's in us. If you look back at what the Baptists were talking about in the 1600s, there's a little book that I like to read called the Baptist Catechism. In 1689, they were talking about this, and they have this answer and question. This is what they used to teach kids. And I think, man, if we could just get there again. But this is what it says about the state of humanity. It says, the sinfulness, the condition of which all mankind fell, is the guilt of Adam's first sin. The lack of original righteousness, the corruption of our whole nature, which is commonly called original sin, together with all transgressions which come from this nature. Talk about, we just have a corrupt nature as a result of the fall. It's there, it's in all of us. Our whole nature is corrupt in us. And what it has done as a result of the fall is has produced within us really deviant desires. Each and every one of us have it. You know, remember James talks about at the very beginning, he says, when you experience various trials, meaning you're going to experience things differently than other people. Your trials will be different than other people's trials. And so this is important to recognize. The same thing is probably to be said about the temptations that you're going to experience. All of us have evil desires that want to entice us and to draw us away towards sin. And they're different from each other. Some of you, maybe you know very well what those evil desires are. Some of you know that maybe in those cases it's sexual. Some of you maybe know that it's towards something else. Maybe it's greed. Maybe it's towards violence. Maybe it's towards drugs. There's something in you that it comes up and there is a huge draw on you. You begin to think about it, and that's something that you can't shake sometimes. It's there, and you know that it's there. But you look at other people around, they don't have the same problem as you. But guess what? They got other problems. And this is something I think as a church we should also be aware of, that when we see people who are struggling with certain sins, we should be a little gracious and recognize that their sinful, corrupt nature that is in them is drawing them towards these things. And sometimes we say, I just don't understand these people. Yes, because their sinful condition is drawing them towards this. You and I have ones that draw us towards other things. It's not going to be the same, but what we can affirm is that every single one of us has that deviant, sinful nature in us. And it wages, what does Peter say? It wages war against the soul. We need to be mindful of that. Now, James says that's in all of us. We all have this sinful nature, and Peter says it wages war against the soul. So he says, so what happens now? You have the thought, you have the desire, you're pulled towards that. What do we do? What does he say? Well, verse 15, he says, after the desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. So he begins to talk about this in terms of somebody conceiving now. It's the idea that now something has been birthed, and here's what takes place is you have this desire and it begins to stay, doesn't just stay in your mind now. It doesn't pop in, it begins to kind of marinate there. And at some point that desire is brought about, and what does it do? It gives birth to sin. It goes from up here and in here, and it begins to now move out of the heart, which is already messed up, and into action. And then it says when it's fully grown, it gives birth to death. Now, we don't want to beat the analogy too much, right? But this is just saying that it doesn't stop. Here's what happens. You have the desire up here. It begins to draw you away, and then it seeps into your heart. It seeps into your actions, and then it brings death. This is a very similar image, once again, to what we see in the garden, right, where once again their eyes are open, and now they have spiritual death, they have physical death that is brought to them. Now they no longer have access to the tree of life. They're separate from God. But notice he says, this is what happens. You think about it, and you begin to want to think about it a little bit more. Not only does it enter into the heart, but now you begin to want to move towards, you begin to cultivate it. Then it begins to birth out sin. And it's very interesting. It's very similar to the image that is in the book of Proverbs. If you open the book of Proverbs, in the first 9 chapters, there's this kind of dueling women. Right? You got one, which is Lady Wisdom, who calls out to people to seek after God, to seek out the way of righteousness. Then you have the woman, Lady Folly. And Lady Folly is one who's bringing you towards adultery, and the image is spiritual adultery. You either go down the road that leads towards righteousness and follow the scriptures, or you go down a road that leads to death. And you listen to words like this in Proverbs chapter 9. Folly is a rowdy woman. She's gullible, knows nothing. She sits by the doorway of her house, on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling to those who pass by, who go straight ahead on their paths. So it depicts Lady Folly as calling out to people as they're going on their way. And what does she call out to these people who are going on their way? They're just trying to go from point A to point B, but off to the distance, she's hollering out, "Whoever is inexperienced, enter here. To one who lacks sense," she says, "stolen water is sweet. Bread eaten secretly is tasty." But he doesn't know that the departed spirits are there and that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. Meaning that she's calling out saying, oh, the blessings that you will get if you just come down this road. You need, even look, she's using, the water is so much better when you drink it with me. The bread is even better than you could imagine when you come down this road. And this guy is going to go down, but he doesn't know that this leads to death and destruction for his life. And ultimately, it leads to that spiritual death, that one that separates from God. Now, this is important because we need to think about what this is saying. This is telling us, by the way, that it does appear to be a difference between, and I'll go back to this passage here, right? It does seem to be a difference between what pops into the head and then what happens as what is considered sin. I'll say this, if you're driving down the road, I've had this happen many times. Driving down the road, and boom, a weird, twisted thought pops into your head. It always happens. I don't know why it happens, but it does. Now, you have a moment, right? In that moment, you can either entertain that and go further and begin to think on it more, or you can begin to recognize that that is something that is foreign to you now. As a Christian, you could recognize that this is not what I should be thinking about. This is not what I need to be thinking on and going on with, and I need to get rid of it. Now, there becomes a point, though, once you've had it in your mind, are you going to continue to entertain it or not? Because that thought itself is sinful, but you have not sinned because you've had the thought. Some of us, if you might be concerned, I've had these thoughts, and I don't want them, and I have them, but you're going to struggle with those thoughts because that evil desire is there. What James is teaching us is just because you've had the thought doesn't mean you're sinful. Now, I will say we need to caution ourselves because Jesus does teach us, right? In Matthew 5, 27, 28, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, whoever looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus is making it very clear that just because you haven't done the deed doesn't mean you're free. And so there is this fine line somewhere, right, that we need to be aware of where I have had the evil desire pop into my heart, my mind, and at some point it becomes a sin of the heart. What am I going to do with it? And I think that's what Jesus is saying. These people were off for a distance, and what they would do is they would let their minds wander. They begin to look at other people and begin to lust at other people, and they just were saying, well, I didn't do it. I'm okay. And Jesus said, you've already been doing that already in the heart. And so there is a difference, I think, than what James is talking about. James can tell us that it can easily move into the heart. That you can already have that sin there, and you live your life here, and all those lusts and thoughts stay in here. And eventually, by the way, they end up moving into the real world as well. We know that. They don't stay in there for long. But there is that line. I will say this, just a side thing, that as you have those thoughts in your life that pop up, like I said, you have to deal with them right then. You don't want them to go further. You don't want them to become heart issues. You don't want them to become sin issues later on. And so, but that sin itself, that sinful, evil desire is not the sin. So what you should do is you shouldn't say, oh God, forgive me for I've had this sinful thought. Right? Because that's what James is saying, is that we're to cut it off, right? We're not to entertain it anymore. I think what you should do is say, as you've had that and you don't want that and you begin to move away from that, is say, God, forgive me because I'm just a sinful individual. And I don't want these in my life. These are pieces of the old man, the old woman that are still there. And even though it wasn't a sin to have it, you recognize that there is sin in your life, right? And I think that's what you could do. We just need to be mindful of that. As you're driving down and you've had that weird thought, that's not your fault, right? You're not to pray for forgiveness for every weird thought that you had. But you should be turning that back to God and recognize that is evidence of that sinful core of who you are. So let's move on with the passage, though, because he goes on after that and he says this, right? He says in verse 16, he says, don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. By his own choice, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would be the kind of first fruits of his creatures. And so he goes on and he says, once again, don't be deceived. I think he's talking about right off at the bat, right, of people saying, God is the one who's brought me here. God made me like this, so therefore I'm going to continue to indulge in these sinful desires, or God has brought me to this temptation. Don't be deceived. I mean, I actually read things in seminary that we had to read, opposing viewpoints of people that would theologically try to make the case that since God is sovereign over all things, every sin that I engage in is blessed by him because he's over it all. Don't go down that road is what James is saying. God is sovereign. He allows you to go through the trial. You've experienced the temptation, but recognize that God is not dangling that through, because what does he say? He says, every good and perfect gift is from above. God will not dangle sin in front of you and say, I know you want this. I know that. Try to stay true to me. Try to stay true to me. No, 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 no. He says God will bring every good and perfect gift to you. God is the source of all good in our lives. His gifts are perfect and always what is part of his plan. That's what he's saying. You recognize it's not God who is trying to lead you astray. He's allowed you to go through, but God wants good for you. God is holding out good. Every good thing comes from him. It's one of the things that he's reminding us in the trials, that as you go through it, and it's a rough trial, and maybe it's hard to really push back against temptation, recognize that God is good, and good comes from God all the time. It's kind of like, as we think about the old song, right? When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you're discouraged thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it'll surprise you what the Lord hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one, count your blessings, see what God hath done. That's what we're being told here, right? Is stop and recognize that throughout this entire time, God has been good and God is still good, but he's not the one who's hanging out evil. He wants you to pass this. He wants you to make it through this. He wants you to be more like him. Another little thing, notice that we're talking in the context of brothers and sisters here. He's reminding these Christians, right, that yes, you're going to go through temptations. It's been said, by the way, for Christians, and I love this quote that I found as studying. It says, Christian maturity is not indicated by the infrequency of temptation, but on the infrequency of succumbing to temptation. So as he's talking to brothers and sisters, we're all looking around the room. We should be looking around the room saying, guys, we've got a long road ahead of us. And it's going to be filled with this stuff, but we are not to succumb to these things. We should be focusing on the goodness of God through it all. He's not led me down to mess me up. He wants me to grow. He wants to bless me through it. And then he gives us a little bit more, and he says this. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. This is probably talking about how God is the one who put those stars in the sky, like in Genesis chapter 4. That's what he's talking. He is over all of creation, who does not change like shifting shadows. Even though those lights that he put into the sky bring different shadows based on the time of the day, God will never change. By his own choice, he gave us birth by the word of truth so that we would be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. And what he's saying is that God is so good, he doesn't change. He doesn't stop. You're not going to find that this week that he is for these things and next week he's changed his mind. You're not going to find that in the scriptures. You will never find that God is against certain sins right now, but next week he's shifted a little bit and he's moved on from those things. He's gotten with the times a little bit. He doesn't do that. But that also means in his goodness, not one day he's not going to be good and for you, and the next day he's done with you. How do you know? What does he say? Here's why we know that he's not done with us, that he's not shifting and he's going to take his goodness away from you because he just felt like it. He says, because by his own choice, he gave us birth by the word. What's he talking about? The new birth that comes. You remember John 3:16, we're told that new birth that would become, born again. He would give us birth by the word so that we'd be kind of first fruits. First fruits were in the Old Testament. Those were the first part of a harvest that you would give and dedicate to God and make them holy, and they were set apart for him, and then you would have the rest of your harvest. But these are those things that you would give off the top of the goodness of God. And I think what James is trying to tell us here is this, like, look, don't doubt the goodness of God, right? Because it was his choice to save you in the first place. You don't stumble into the faith is what James is telling us. You might think, well, I'm part of the church. I came, but does God notice me? Yes, he notices you because you're here by his choice. And the good part about this is we just found out he doesn't shift or change. He chose you and he's sticking with that choice. He's not here for you today. Say, I chose them, but man, I'm just tired of that person today. The goodness of God, he goes back to the gospel and says, don't ever doubt the goodness of God because he saved us. He chose you to save you. And that's how he ends the passage. So a couple things as we walk away from this passage just to kind of think through. First and foremost, do you know those evil desires that wage war against your soul? Are you aware of the ways that you fall? What are your tendencies towards sin? I think all of us should be. All of us should know how we're wired and the ways that we slip up and begin to think through, how do I put those to death? Right? As you want to finish that passage of what Jesus says about adultery in the heart, he says, you've heard that it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully and has already committed adultery with her in his heart, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. For it's better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of the parts of your body than your whole body to go into hell. And what Jesus is saying is take care of it now. Know what those ways are in which you are slipping up and deal with it now. All of us should know what those ways are. We should be aware of them and be mindful and begin to set up ways that we don't go down that road again. If you know that you have a tendency, there's a pull on your life and it's always been there towards one sin or the other, you need to begin to find ways that how do I set up barriers to keep me from going there? Here's another thing we need to be thinking about. Sin is serious. You know, we can't live in sin and just wink at it. You know, despite how a powerful draw that you might have towards the sin, despite whatever cravings you might have towards it, you can't belittle it and just say, well, this is just who I am, it's okay. You know, everybody else is kind of doing this, not really a big deal for the culture anymore. You can't let sin have a foothold. You remember he says that this is to brothers and sisters. This is in the context of a Christian community, and he gives us this saying that we need to make sure that we don't let temptation turn into sin in our lives. We can't just wink at it. You know, sometimes in churches too, we get this kind of hyper grace approach to everything, and we kind of come from this mindset. And maybe you've gone here one time before. Jesus has saved me. My salvation is set. I'm going to heaven. I got my fire insurance card. And so it really doesn't matter anymore, right? Because I'm going, I know where I'm going, so I'll just live the way that I live. And he loves me anyways. And we just kind of wink at sin. And by the way, that is kind of where our culture, the American church is moving, by the way. It's big into he made you, he loved you, you're already going to heaven, just be you. And he's covering it all anyways. But there's a reason why he's talking to the context of the gathered church, calling them brothers and sisters, and says, deal with it now. Don't let it go towards sin, because sin is an issue. We can't just say, well, These aren't issues for us. We've moved on. And that's what the church is wanting to do today. But the scriptures don't let us do that. And we're bound by what the scriptures show us, is we need to make sure that we recognize that sin is important. That's why Jesus tells us in Matthew 18, we have to deal with sin in a certain way. He gives us church discipline. That there's a way that when somebody's in sin in the church, and this is why we have membership, right, is to try to pull us back on track. That you go with one person, you begin to deal with it. And if they don't listen, you bring another person to deal with it. And if they don't listen, you bring another person. And then at that point, you then bring it to the church. Because sin is an important thing. We don't want it to have a foothold in your life. We should deal with it. It's why Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 5, 9 through 13, and I love this. Now, this should help us frame. We don't want sin in our lives, but we have to make sure how we deal with those outside of Jesus who are giving into temptation all the time. Notice what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, verses 9 through 13. I wrote to you in a letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. I didn't mean the immoral people of the world, or the greedy, or the swindlers, or the idolaters. Otherwise, you'd have to leave the world. I love that. Because at one point, they're trying to stay pure, and they're like, no, I can't hang out with all these people because of what's going on. He goes, you'd have to leave the entire world to do that. He says, but I actually wrote to you not to associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or a sister who is sexually immoral or greedy or an idolater or verbally abusive or a drunkard or a swindler. Don't even eat with such a person. For what business is of mine to judge outsiders? Don't you judge those who are on the inside? God judges outsiders. Remove the evil person from among you. So the biblical command is we've got to take sin seriously. That's why James is saying, guys, it starts, know what those evil desires are, and don't let it go further. The church should take that sin, that in all of our lives, we should be knowing, how am I wired? How do I make sure I don't give sin a foothold? Because it matters to the church. And when those who are outside who don't know Jesus, we should show some grace to them. And our hope is that as they encounter Jesus, as they encounter the Word of God, that God will begin to work on them and change them. And they will begin to stop those things as they encounter Him. But ours should be concerned with each other in the faith, not necessarily casting judgment on those outside. So as we walk away, here's something I want you to think of. Which one of you in here need to repent for falling into sin continuously? You know, there's probably some of you in this room that you never put up any fight for temptation. You just fall continuously over and over, and you probably find yourself praying, oh God, please forgive me for this one. I know if you just forgive me and get me out of this one, I'll be good. I promise next week it'll be better. And then you find yourself praying that prayer the next day and the next day, and you just continue to fall and fall and fall. And so some of you just need to ask God to forgive you and to repent. Some of you, maybe you've been on this path and you give into temptation, but you're not repentant at all. Some of us need to just come to the Lord and ask Him to finally deal with this. Maybe you have temptations that are so strong that you need someone to come alongside you. You need to open up because God doesn't want you to continue to fall. That's why He's brought us into a church family, to walk alongside each other, that we begin to try to help each other. And there should be no judgment for the evil desires that are pulling us away. We're trying to help each other with that. We should be open with that kind of stuff. Maybe for some of you, though, today, maybe you have fallen repeatedly, and now you have doubted the goodness of God, of whether there's any grace left for you. Maybe you thought, how could God still love me because I have done this over and over and I can't seem to get it right? And you do wonder, is He looking at me differently? Is He done with me? Has He stopped talking to me? And I go back to the very end of how this passage ends, right? How does James bring us back? You want to know the goodness of God? Go back to this passage, right? He says He doesn't change. And what did He do? He gives us good gifts. And then it says this, that He, by His own choice, gave us birth by the Word. The greatest gift, if you doubt God's goodness towards you, if He's done with you yet, go back to these words when He says He's not done with you. He chose you. He knows you. You are His. He is good all the time. His choice in saving you is still what He stands by today, because that was all on Him. He knows what's best for you, and He chose you for this salvation. So do you believe that? Do you recognize that today? For some of you, it's time to get back to who is God revealed in His Word and to settle on that. You may not feel it. You may not feel and that God still loves you, but go back to what you know, which is recognize He doesn't change. You change all the time. but he doesn't change, and stand on that. And maybe for some of you in here, maybe you don't know Jesus today. Do you have God's best? It talks about every good and perfect gift coming back. Do you have his best? Here's a question. As you look at your own life and you see that your life is like mine and everybody else is in here, it's a pattern of I have desires and I have temptations and I give into them. And some of those you think nothing of, but others you know you've gone down some roads that you really would hope no one would ever know about. The scriptures tell us it's really clear that once that sin happens, it leads to death. What is given to all of us and due all of us is separation from God. So how will you stand one day before God with your record? The scriptures tell us that the perfect way to stand is not in your own, but in the record of Jesus. That's why we go back to that. It's not that you can do anything else to please him and to maybe make him love you today. The reason why he loves you and the reason why he is good all the time is because he is the one who is in it all. It's not based on your salvation, would not be based on have I pleased God today, but you have been you please God by the record of Jesus. The Gospels tell us that Jesus came, he lived a perfect life. God decided, I'm going to do this myself because man can't do it alone. Jesus comes, lives the perfect life. God has him punished, killed on the cross for my sin and your sin. He's put into a tomb and 3 days later rises from the grave to say that God would change this. He would take your sinful record that you're hoping you might sneak by and give you the record of Jesus. And so recognize that when God looks at you in the future, he's no longer looking at your record anymore, but looking at the record of Jesus. His full love that he has for Jesus now poured out on you. Do you have that assurance right now? Do you stand like this with God? Do you have the record of Jesus? Do you have the full goodness of God has to offer? Do you know if you belong to him yet? My prayer is that you would. And so I'm going to pray for you now. And for the rest of us, if you have that, will you live in light of that for God now? Lord God, I thank you for the scriptures. God, I thank you for this teaching on temptation. God, I pray that for many of us in here, we would be a people that begin to see more and more of us not succumbing to temptation. That we would begin to recognize that you don't want us to go down this path, that we wouldn't wink at sin, that we would recognize the ways that we are prone to wander. As we know in the hymn, we sing it, so prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. God, I pray that we would recognize those ways that we are prone to wander, and we would not let them have a foothold in our life. God, I pray for those in here who desperately just need to repent, to be seen and shown, to see their sin, to show it to them, that they would stick and they recognize that something needs to give. God, I pray for those in here who have tried and they're devastated by their sin and they have doubted the goodness of God. God, I pray that today they would recognize that they belong to you, that devastation over their sin is a sign that they do belong to you. And God, I pray that you would help us as a church to come alongside each other. This is given to the church to recognize that all of us have problems and struggles. Help us to walk with each other through it. Help us to help make others strong, to not go towards sin. God, I pray for those who don't know you today. I pray that today they would recognize what the full goodness of God would look like, to stand in the record of Jesus. No longer in their own, no longer looking at the list of all the wrongs that they've done, only in the full list of all the good that Jesus has done in their place. God, I pray that if they don't know you today, that you would help them to just call out to you and say, God, save me. Give me the record of Jesus. Lord, I pray that you'd work in them today. We ask these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.